Hi everyone. This is going to be a video version of the instructions for the SPSS assignment. This is our first non-SPSS version of the assignment. You might remember doing the first one using SPSS. Here the idea is the same, except we're going to be using other types of software to do the assignment. So I've got written instructions. I'm just going to do a video walkthrough here of some of the things that might be a little tricky, including coming up with a question, how to find ways to do the analysis, and then I'm going to create a separate thing for working with Google for graphing, because that's going to be a little bit more complex. And for both the analysis and the graphing with Google, the same procedures apply if you want to use Excel, and that's freely available to all Augustana students. So I imagine a lot of you have that on your computers already. I'll say a little bit about writing, but again, that's probably easier to get just from the written instructions. So 1 and 2 will be the main thing in this video. All right, so coming up with a question. In the first assignment, a lot of you chose to look at the Augie Senior Survey from the class of 2012. That was available in our Google folder while we were still having regular classes, and that file is still there. So one thing you can do is go through there and look for data that might be interesting. For me, kind of a movie buff, and I don't know if you know this, but I've been stuck inside by myself a lot lately, and so I've watched a lot of movies. Here's something. I've had this box set for a while. This is the Godfather trilogy. If you haven't seen it, it's amazing. It's pretty old, about as old as I am, and in about I think 72 or 73, the first one came out. It was a huge success, won Oscars and all kinds of things. This weekend I was watching the sequel, and I noticed Godfather 2 is every bit as good as the first one, and I think it might have also won the same Oscars. I mean, it's really amazing. And since I was also thinking about t-tests at the time, it occurred to me that this is a perfect t-test. I think that most sequels, the second installment of the franchise falls way short of the first one. And it just strikes me that The Godfather is a rare example. But I don't know. So I'm going to do a t-test looking at the first and second installment of movies to see if there's a significant difference between the quality of the original and the sequel. I will say that I'm thinking of this as a dependent samples test. For your assignment, you can do independent or dependent. But this would be dependent because I've got The Godfather 1 compared to Godfather 2. So if I know the title of a movie in my first sample, I know the title of the movie that's matched or paired with it in the second. So in a way, it's a repeated measure study. So that's the approach I'll be doing here. So that's how I did number 1. That's how I came up with my question. I have 2 groups, and I know I can find data on those 2 groups and average them and compare them. So the way I found my data is I went to Rotten Tomatoes, a site that has all kinds of data on movies, and so I just type in The Godfather, and I see Godfather, the original, came out in 72. It has a 98%, and Godfather Part 2 has a 97%. So as you can see, it's very, very similar. I'm just going to use a small sheet of paper here to write down those numbers. Okay. The next thing that came to my mind was The Hangover. And with The Hangover, I thought that the second one was funny, but nobody else liked it. So The Hangover Part 2 got a 33, whereas the original got a 78. All right, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to go get 10 videos or movies and come right back. Okay, I got 10 movies, and just on a slip of paper, you can see I made 2 columns And in each column, I've got a score for either the original and then the sequel. So The Godfather and Hangover both have 3. I compared 1 and 2. I also looked at some bigger ones like Pirates of the Caribbean, Harry Potter that have multiple ones. I always included just the first one and the second one until I got 10. And from that point, I just need to find a way to analyze it. I've linked a couple things in the written assignments that you could use. Here I'm going to show you how to use SociStats or Social Science Stats, which is a website. Now, when I Googled t-test calculators, it came up with the t-test calculator for 2 independent means. I'm going to treat this as a dependent sample, so I'm going to go up to this tab right here that says calculators. There we go, and that's the whole list of calculators. There they go. They have one for dependent means, and that's what I want. Okay, so I recommend reading through the introduction. That's a good way to remind yourself how this works and what makes something a correct choice for dependent samples. Down here it says take me to the calculator, so let's go to that. All right. Instructions up here says do 1 score per line. And because it's paired values, I need to have the same number in both treatment conditions, and I need to enter these things in order. So, for example, I'm going to type 98. Next one in the column, that's The Godfather. The next one is Hangover 1. This is Meet the Parents. Yeah, I messed up, sorry. Okay, 98. There's for The Godfather. The 78 is for The Hangover. There's a 98 for Meet the Parents. Then over here, The Godfather 2 is 97. Hangover 2 is 33. Meet the Fockers. 91. Oh, that's not Meet the Fockers. That's Fistful of Dollars, and for a few dollars more, Great Westerns. All right, I'm going to pause and finish this and come right back. Okay, I'm back. As you can see, I've entered 10 scores. Each movie in order has its matching one over here in the same order, starting with Godfather there, and The Godfather 2 there, Hangover 1 there, Hangover 2, so forth until I got all of them in. Down here, I get to choose my significance level. 0.05 is the default, so we're going to do that. I've never studied this before, so I'm just going to leave it at 2-tailed. And then I'm going to hit calculate. And here we go. All right, so this gives you some intermediate steps. Remember that this is really a test of the differences. So this is treatment 2 minus treatment 1. That means that The Godfather 2 was 1 point lower than Godfather. For The Hangover, Hangover 2 was 45 points minus or less than the first one. Okay. The average difference was negative 22. All right, so down here, it tells me the null hypothesis is that there will be no difference. However, the sample mean was negative 22. If you put that here in the t-test formula, that gives me a t-test of negative 3.19. Now, there's several things I need to know. First of all, this is statistically significant, as it says right there, because our p-value is less than 0.05. Now, the way that works is that these calculators will calculate the probability of a type 1 error. So this value here, the p-value is 0.01. What that means is that if I reject the null hypothesis, I have about a 1% chance of type 1 error. Here, when I said alpha is 0.05, I said I'm willing to accept a 5% chance. So since the actual p-value is much lower than what I'm willing to tolerate, I'm willing to take the bet and reject the null hypothesis. 0.01 is a pretty good bet. All right. Now, the next thing we need to do is figure out Cohen's d, and we need to make sure we have the basic descriptive statistics. So for that, I'm going to go to Google Sheets. I'm just going to show you real quick how that works. First, what I'm going to do is I need the mean and standard deviation of our differences, because that's what we're testing. So I'm going to select those and copy them. And then when I go to my Google Drive, I'm going to just start a new sheet. Whoops, and then still loading. I'm going to paste my scores in there. All right, so these are my difference scores. The way this works is exactly the same as Excel. If you've used those before, this will be easy. If you haven't, I don't think it'll be bad. What I'm going to do is just in this spot below my numbers, I'm going to put in a formula for the mean. So here, I'm going to label that average, and then in this box right here, I come up to this sigma, which is the functions menu, select it, and just click average. That automatically generates the command I need, and notice it says equals average and then parentheses. So what that's asking me to do is highlight the numbers I want averaged and then hit return. So there's my average. It's negative 22 as we saw on the other page. Here I want to do the same for standard deviation. So I put standard deviation right there. Go back to my functions menu. And it's not one of the automatic ones. You have to come down here to all and then scroll down until you find standard deviation. And it is STDEV. There it is. And notice when I mouse over it, it says standard deviation. All right, so it's in that box, and again, the command is there. I just need to select the numbers I need. And notice I skipped the average. I don't want that in there. There we go. That's my standard deviation. Now, at this point, you can either do the calculation here. The way you would do that is go to another square and just go equals, and then select the square with the average in it, slash for divide, hit the square with the standard deviation, enter, and that is your Cohen's d value. I noticed we usually report that as an absolute value because we're just concerned with how far apart the means are. So there we go. All right, so at this point, I have my mean, standard deviation, Cohen's d. Over here I have my t value, so I'm ready to write this up. I'm going to pause and we'll come right back. Okay, so last thing I did was I wrote up an example of the output for you. And what I did was I looked up what information I needed. I know I need my t value. I need to know that my p is less than 0.05. I can write that down, or I can write down the actual p value. I decided to do that. I need to report the mean and standard deviation of my difference, which is right there. Alternatively, I could write down the mean and standard deviation of each individual group. I just went with the difference, though. And I need Cohen's d. So, using the information in the assignment, I came up with this. It's all of the 5 topics that you need to say when you write about statistics. So the way I wrote this is I conducted a two-tailed independent samples t-test with alpha of 0.05, which is the specific test I used. The purpose of it was to see if the sequels were rated differently than the originals and critics' reviews. I said that there was a significant difference, provided an APA-style citation of my stats with my t, with 9 degrees of freedom. It's less than 3.19, so I got this 3.19 from my online calculator, and then